When it comes to classic firearms, almost nothing beats a Colt revolver. And the Colt 1851 Navy percussion revolver was one of the most important firearms of the 19th century, one of Samuel Colt's most popular firearms of all time. Over 250,000 of these revolvers were manufactured by the time production ended, and they were used by a wide range of individuals from the 1850s all the way through the 1870s and beyond. If you take a look at the pair before me today from the Greg Lamp collection, they are extraordinary. There might be over 250,000 of these out there, but almost none of them look like this. If you take a look at each of these revolvers, they're pretty well near what they looked like when they left the factory. The main exception really being that the silver now has a very attractive aged patina. Other than that, they've just got, just minor handling and storage marks, which is exceptional considering this pair came from the American Civil War. The 1851 Navy was used by a ton of legendary figures from American history. You've got Old West icons like Wild Bill Hickok and Buffalo Bill Cody. You've got the Texas Rangers using these before the Civil War, through the Civil War, and beyond. And then you've got Union and Confederate soldiers using these revolvers extensively in the American Civil War. And this extraordinary pair is not just from the Civil War, they were actually presented to a U.S. Army officer in 1862, so kind of in the height of the fighting of the American Civil War. If you take a look at the backstraps of each of these revolvers, they're inscribed, presented to Captain A.L. Huff by Union Rifles, Terre Haute, Indiana. And like so many of the other incredible pieces from Lamp's collection, they're not just high condition, but they're also backed up by period documentation and extensive research by Mr. Lamp. So the inscriptions down the backstrap are big and bold, nice period style. And then they're backed up by the fact that we have period documentation of Huff himself talking about how he owned these revolvers and how they were presented to him and they were important keepsakes for him in his later years. He wrote, "My life at Terre Haute was tiresome, and I longed to be in the field. I interested myself, however, by organizing a home guard, the Union Rifles, composed of the young businessmen of the place. These I instructed and was the means of preparing a number of young men for officers of volunteers, which they subsequently became." And he later writes, "Before leaving Terre Haute, the Union Rifles presented me with a handsome pair of pistols, which I still have, souvenirs of those gallant young men, many of whom I afterward met in the field, and too many of whom never returned from it." As you can see from these excerpts, these revolvers were important to Captain Huff. And you can kind of see that while he called it tiresome to be in Terre Haute because he longed to be in the battlefield, he bonded with the men of the Union Rifles. And the reason he was there training these men is because he had military experience prior to the American Civil War. So many of the volunteers during the American Civil War had no prior military experience. A lot of the officers and commanders had no experience. But Huff had been active since 1853 when he joined the Washington Grays, and then his unit enlisted almost immediately when the American Civil War broke out. And by June of 1861, he was actually discharged so that he could join the U.S. 19th Infantry as a captain in the regular U.S. Army. In that role, he traveled to Indiana to help recruit for the regular U.S. Army and then also helped organize the Union Rifles and train them for battle. After leaving Terre Haute, Indiana and returning to the Army, Huff fought alongside some of those same men and served underneath multiple Union generals throughout the rest of the American Civil War. And as the war ended, he didn't transition back to civilian life. He remained in the Army all the way until 1890 when he reached the mandatory retirement age of 64. And during those post-war years, he traveled throughout the American West. He was stationed out west during the Sioux Wars. He was stationed down in the Southwest during the conflicts with the Apaches. And he then was basically forced into retirement after more than 30 years of military service and nearly 3 decades in the regular U.S. Army. So he was a career military man fighting through the American Civil War and through the Indian Wars. So if you take a look at each of these revolvers, they're basically as close to near new as you're going to get from a Civil War Colt 1851 Navy. One of the most iconic American firearms of the 19th century, but you never see them like this. You almost never see these guns with a whole lot of blue at all. And if you take a look at each of these, they are extraordinary. I mean, if I roll this in the light, you can see that the blue on the barrel is like reflective. I can see my own reflection in the blue on the barrels here. The factory address here is incredibly crisp. The cylinder scene showing the Naval Battle of Campeche is still extraordinarily crisp. You can see the markings on the cylinder, incredibly crisp. The case colors remain vibrant. People often think that modern reproductions have too bright a case colors. No, this is how bright they were when they were straight out of the factory. And then, as I mentioned before, one of the only real signs of age you see on these guns is actually a beautiful sign of age, which is the silver plating on the trigger guard and the backstrap has taken on this dark aged patina. I love to see that patina on an antique Colt because that means this gun has not been polished. It's just been left carefully preserved in this case with its mate for decades. I mentioned earlier that Civil War presentation Colt revolvers in and of themselves are very fascinating historic artifacts, but not incredibly scarce in a broad sense. But what is incredibly scarce is finding double cased sets. So we have a presentation pair here that is 2 matched revolvers in a cased set fitted to the pair with a set of accessories. You do not find that. Most of the sets you're going to find are going to be, some of the late Samuel Colt presentation sets he presented, but these are actually a double-cased presentation set from an individual unit to an individual officer. So this double fitted case is extremely rare, and you can see that it's still got a full set of period accoutrements. These accoutrements remained with this set for decades. At one point, the flask was actually removed from the set, but then Greg Lamp tracked it back down and put it back in this set. So it's the original flask that actually was separated and came back. That kind of shows you Greg Lamp's dedication to getting these things right, to making them whole. Mr. Lamp didn't just spend that level of dedication to keep the set together. He also spent an incredible amount of time accumulating a basically library of information on Captain Huff and this set, and that accompanies the set as well. On top of the documentation assembled by Mr. Lamp, this incredible pair is featured in the Met's Lone Exhibition of Percussion Colt Revolvers. It's illustrated in Samuel Colt Presents. It's featured in the Antique Arms Annual from 1971, and it's in Colt's History and Heroes by John G. Hamilton. This auction is absolutely packed with quantity and quality. We've got guns from the Norman Blank collection spanning back all the way to matchlocks and wheelocks in incredibly high condition, all the way through the incredible classic antique American firearms of the Greg Lamp collection. We've got George Lewis's iconic single action armies. We've got machine guns. We've got modern firearms of exceptional quality, all coming up this December down in Bedford, Texas.